Hey there, good morning. This is Pete Pardo with Seat of Tranquility. Today is Monday, April the 17th. We're here to report and talk about another tragic loss to the music industry. Of course, this particular time it happens to be guitar legend Allan Holdsworth, who died yesterday on Easter Sunday at the age of 70, so far due to undisclosed reasons, so we're not really sure. But it really doesn't matter at this point. The guitar world, music world, is just a much sadder place without this ridiculous innovator. Man, this is a guy who has just been so important to the guitar community for such a long period of time. A trailblazer, a complete innovator, one of the most influential players ever. A guy who, God, burst on the scene in the early 70s with a style that, pretty much unheard of at the time. And even to this day, although there have been guys who have, come out and tried to do similar type things to Holdsworth, nothing could touch the master, or the maestro, as he was called by many. So it is indeed a sad day, and I just wanted to kind of recollect a little bit on my memories of Holdsworth and some of his recordings that are really special to me. I remember, I think the first time I ever listened to Allan Holdsworth, or was introduced to Allan Holdsworth, was probably in the early mid-'80s. I think I was a college student at the time, and someone had played for me, I believe it was the IOU album, and I was just like, whoa. What is that? Because, at the time, I was, my heroes were, Blackmore and Naomi and Gary Moore and Michael Schenker and, that sort of thing, Robin Trower. And along comes this guy. This was right around the time where I first started to, listen to some of these, jazz fusion dudes. So like I had already been introduced to Demiola a little bit, and John McLaughlin, and Steve Morse, with the Dregs, and all of a sudden it's like, who's this Holdsworth guy? And I was like, whoa, that is something completely different. So, shortly thereafter, I got a hold of Metal Fatigue, and I was like, man, this is some serious stuff going on here. This guy's just playing these legato solos like I never heard this kind of stuff before. And, from there, it's like, I was pretty much locked in and a fan. And I think, some of the albums that I really, I'm just going to go through some of the really special albums that I've explored from Holdsworth. Of course, there was the great UK. That's a band that I got into very shortly after being introduced to him, and that was the great prog band that he formed with Bill Bruford and John Wetton. Really, really incredible stuff. Eddie Jobson as well on keyboards and violin. And, you keep going. I kept going back, because all of a sudden I discovered it's like, well, he's not just a solo artist. He's been a part of some really cool bands. He did a couple albums with Gong, really cool, like kind of Canterbury avant-garde jazz fusion prog thing. He did the Bundles album with Soft Machine, which is an incredible, incredible album. Probably my favorite album by that band. Soft Machine had a lot of really, really good albums. I discovered this very cool early 70s, I believe it was 73 album that he played in a band called Tempest, which were kind of like a bluesy hard rock act, sort of like Cream-ish, So that was kind of interesting to discover Holdsworth doing more of like a kind of heavy rock style, because, most of what we've heard from him over the years has been more in this kind of like jazz fusion thing. What else we got? Of course, Enigmatic Ocean, Jean-Luc Ponty. What an incredible album to hear his wispy, snaking guitar solos mixing with Jean-Luc Ponty's violin and Daryl Sturmer's, more rugged electric guitar, just magical, magical stuff. He also played on the Individual Choice album in '83. And then, lest we forget, Bruford, the band Bruford. So we've got Feels Good to Me and One of a Kind, okay? These were released in '78 and '79. So again, this ridiculous jazz fusion ensemble with Bruford, fresh from Yes and King Crimson, doing more of a jazz thing. Jeff Berlin on bass, and Holdsworth. Just incredible music. Incredible music. What else we got? He did some stuff, he did some sessions with Stanley Clarke. Oh man, what else? I know I'm missing some stuff here. A band called Bottom. I think that's the first band he ever played with. They had a record contract. Again, more of like a bluesy psych rock band type of thing. Oh, Tony Williams' Lifetime. Okay, so if you remember, Tony Williams' Lifetime started out as a trio with Tony and McLaughlin and Larry Young on organ. And then once that kind of outfit kind of fizzled, Tony kept the band going, but he decided to bring in, bass player, guitar player, keyboard player, that whole thing, and make it a full-fledged band. So in comes Holdsworth, and they do these ridiculous albums, Believe It and $1 Million Legs, and that was 75 and 76. So, again, you've got this ridiculous period of creativity where he was just, bursting on the scene, but not really as a solo artist, but like joining all these bands, never really sticking around for too long, but almost like a hired gun type of thing. So he went from, in the span of a few years, so starting in '69, you had Higginbottom. He also played with Nucleus briefly, Ian Carr's great jazz fusion band. So that was around '72. Then in Tempest, he did the self-titled album with the band Tempest. And then '75, he's off to Soft Machine. Later that year and into '76, he's with the new Tony Williams' Lifetime. And then he joins up with Gong in '76 through '78. And then he's with Ponte in the middle of that, and then, Bruford shortly thereafter. It's just, and then UK, right? So, but then all of a sudden, that's when the solo career started happening. So his very, very first solo album, official solo album, although if you were to ask him, he usually dismissed it. That was the Velvet Darkness album on the CTI label, I'm sorry. But his first official album, as far as Allan was concerned, was the IOU album in '82. And then you had Road Games, the EP, another great one, Metal Fatigue, Adavatron, Sand, Secrets, so on and so forth, many from there. He also, what was incredible is early in his career, he was mostly playing either a Gibson SG or a Strat, right? Then in like the '80s, he started playing the headless Steinberger guitars. Then he wound up playing this thing called a Syntax, this wild-looking contraption that was one of the earliest guitar synthesizers. Had a couple keys on it, and he had like a little tube that you'd blow in and make all these wild sounds. He really got into that for a few years. Then he eventually got back into just guitar. And, in recent years, he's had a partnership with Carvin, and came up with some really cool headless guitars, really interesting guitars. And, he's been kind of quiet on the recording scene in recent memories. I don't think he's released a new studio album in over a decade, although there have been numerous live albums that have come out. He had a little partnership going with Moon June Records for a while, so we saw some cool live releases. Did some work with Soft Machine Legacy. So, just a ridiculous body of work. The sad thing about all this is that as beloved and influential as Holdsworth has been for decades, you talk to most guitar players, whether professional or not, or amateur guitar players, even some of the greats, Eddie Van Halen, Satriani, Tony McAlpine, all those guys. You can read interviews over the years. In fact, today you go on Twitter or just look up Allan Holdsworth's death on the internet, and you'll see boatloads of tweets from a lot of the greats of today who are just praising the life, the legacy, and the talents of Allan Holdsworth. This guy was a legend to any guitar player. Like I said, professional or not. But the brutally sad truth of this whole thing is that this guy never made any money. Here he was practicing his craft and just wowing listeners for decades. Okay? One of the most influential players ever, one of the most unique and original players of all time. And the guy barely ever made a dime. It's sad. Right now it's like, there's a pledge fund going on to help pay for his funeral, because his family needs help. And he just unfortunately never made any money doing this. And it's just mind-boggling. The talent of this guy and the look at that discography. All these, maybe not million-selling albums, but all these really important albums in the history of jazz and fusion and progressive rock. And it's just like, he basically died, close to penniless? There have been stories over the years of him having to sell half of the studio and his equipment and things like that. And, he had these great endorsements and stuff, but just, I guess that's the life of a jazz player You know, unless you're out there touring constantly and pumping out albums on a regular basis, even you pumping out albums, there's no guarantee they're going to make a lot of money. So it's just really heartbreaking to I think when all this is said and done, we're going to look back on the life of Allan Holdsworth, and it's just going to be, despite the amazing things he did, it's just such a tragic life, because he deserves so much better. Deserves so much better. I had the opportunity to meet him once, just once. It was years ago. I'm going to say, I don't remember the year exactly. It was either the late 80s or the very early 90s. Okay, somewhere between like 88 and 92. I'm thinking it was the early 90s. And he was playing in this little, it was a one-off, band that was put together of all-stars. I even forget what it was called. It might have been called Stanley Clark's All-Stars or something like that. So Stanley Clark was in the band, and Holdsworth was in the band, and God, I don't even remember the other musicians. It was a long time ago, and they played at a local club here in Poughkeepsie, New York, called The Chance. Jazz Explosion, whatever. And the band were ready to go on, and they're all, getting up on stage, whatever, and they called for Allan over the PA, and I happened to be like not too far from the bar, and all of a sudden I see a little flurry of activity behind me, and there was Allan Holdsworth standing like literally right next to me, drinking at the bar, waiting for the show to start, and I looked over and he looked at me, and I'm like, Allan, how are you? I guess you got to go on stage. And he's like, yep, boom, and there he went. That was it. Brief, quick. And then he went on stage, and, for me, it was mind-blowing because you got, Holdsworth and Stanley Clark, two musicians that I've loved and respected for a million years. And this was a period where I was really, really getting into jazz and the fusion scene, the early 90s, because, man, for me, metal was like dead throughout the 90s. So I started exploring like a lot of the jazz and fusion stuff and the prog stuff from the 70s and the 80s and whatnot, really getting into it. So I was just like, just my mind was blown here. So the only time I ever saw him live. So kind of sad. But, I'm going to be playing the heck out of Allan Holdsworth material from all the great albums he's appeared on over the next few days, because I think, we want to remember him fondly, and, never quite could figure out how to play any Holdsworth stuff. I mean, it's ridiculously complex, whatever, but I'm sure most guitar players are saying that today. But, Allan, we're going to miss you. Don't know what happened yesterday, but we're sad to see you go. And like I said, I wish that life treated you a little better. I wish you could have really enjoyed the fruits of your labors a little bit more. I know it's been a struggle for you for a long time, and hopefully you're in a better place up there, jamming with all the other greats who have left us too early. So rest in peace, Allan Holdsworth, dead at the age of 70. A really sad loss for the music community today. So until next time, take care, have a good day. Take care.